The reason they signed Darnold is because Kubiak is sort of the old school, let's put the quarterback under center, let's run the zone run game predominantly outside zone. And when you look at what Darnold did last year in Minnesota under Kevin O'Connell, he had the second most play action dropbacks under center in the league.
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a teaching tutorial Thursday, which means the venerable, outstanding NFL Films legend Greg Cosell is in the house. Hard to believe, not only does it feel like training camps are opening all over the place, and I think they'll all be in training camp by the time I talk to Greg next week, but also we only have 2 weeks left of divisional previews. We'll do the NFC West this week. Next week, we'll do the AFC West. By the way, 2 weeks from tonight, there will be NFL football players in NFL uniforms on a field, on TV, and we'll be watching them in the Hall of Fame game, which is just bananas when you think about it. Love those of you, by the way, that rate and review the show. Remember, you ever have a question for me or Greg that you would like to ask on the show, just rate and review the show and email it to me, ross@rosstucker.com, or certainly you can take advantage of any of the sponsors that you hear on the show. Greg is at Greg Cosell. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We're at Ross Tucker Pod. Love, love, love the growing audience on YouTube every week, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Decent amount of news, actually, to get to since Monday with all the contracts and Najee Harris. We got guys retiring. So we'll get to all that stuff after Greg. But first, it's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
Okay, Greg, so we're going to dive into the NFC West today, but I want to start with a couple of New York Jets that got gigantic contracts this week. And I can comment later on sort of my reasoning as to why I think the Jets did these contracts and the message they're trying to send with the new regime, et cetera, et cetera. But clearly they're good players. Garrett Wilson, the receiver, Sauce Gardner, the corner. You know, they're both pretty high first-round picks. Joe Douglas, I would say for the most part, who's back with the Eagles, by the way, Greg, I think Joe Douglas, for the most part, has a pretty good idea of what a good football player looks like, and he appears to have nailed it with those two guys. I was not sure, Greg, that Sauce Gardner would be this type of player. Just with that size, I didn't know if he had the movement ability. Curious to get your thoughts, really kind of a breakdown of both those guys.
Well, you know, it's funny. The Jets became a little dysfunctional, obviously, and I think Gardner probably did not have his best season a year ago. But corners with his size, his length, his movement skills, there's not many guys like that. I mean, clearly Aaron Glenn now being there, and, you know, we both know Aaron Glenn and the kind of coach he is. He was a DB, a first-round pick, a really good player in the league for a lot of years. You know, and he'll get him fired up, and that's the way Aaron Glenn's personality is. So Sauce Gardner, traits-wise, is a really, really good player. And what will be interesting is how they deploy him, because he essentially played left corner for the Jets under previous regimes. We'll see how Aaron Glenn chooses to deploy him, whether he'll become a matchup type corner. There are not many of those in the league, as you know, Ross, corners that move from side to side and match up against big-time wideouts. Maybe he'll become the boundary corner and match up to the big-time boundary X-receivers in the league. We don't know exactly how that will play out, but he certainly has the skill set to do that. And I think that's, you know, a signing that says, hey, we're going to keep really, really good players. You know, the bottom line is you either sign him to what essentially market value is, or you get into a battle with him from a financial standpoint, and you don't want to start a regime by doing that.
It's a terrific point. That's what I was going to make later. That would be a real, real bad sign.
Yep.
To the locker room, to the agents, everything.
Yep.
If you were going to fight these guys tooth and nail. Because the thing I always think is so funny about it, Greg, 9 times out of 10, they still end up signing the guy. and
That's
they
the
end up
thing.
signing him for more.
Yeah.
So it's like all of the fighting and all of the back and forth. What did it really even accomplish?
No, that's a great point. I mean, I'm not up on that. You are a little more than I am, but I mean, at the end of the day, what are you gaining from doing that?
Not much. What are the Jets gaining from signing Garrett Wilson long term, Greg?
Yeah, Wilson's another guy. He's a fascinating guy. Again, the Jets were a little dysfunctional on offense, clearly. He is an elite separator. He is one of those guys. I'm not going to put him in the Justin Jefferson category simply because he hasn't had that kind of production for any number of reasons. But you might be talking about two of the most elite pure separators in the league. And that's what Garrett Wilson is. Now, in talking to people, I know there are some who believe that he freelances a bit. That's hard for me to know watching tape because I don't specifically know what he's taught and what he's not taught. And some believe that's one reason why the targets aren't what maybe they should be given his skill set. But he's got everything you want in a wideout other than true size. He's obviously not a 205-pound receiver like a Justin Jefferson. But when you talk about a guy that at the top of his route stem can create separation, you're talking about a guy that's definitely top 3 in the league.
I think that's an interesting thing, Greg. The dynamic or dichotomy between being an elite separator and a little bit of a freelancer, because there's no doubt in my mind that Travis Kelce freelances, right?
Right.
And that's part of how he gets the separation. So, like, I think it's interesting. There's if you're the third string receiver, you're not freelancing at all.
Now, you make a really interesting point, though. If your quarterback is also a movement guy, that sometimes breaks down the integrity of the play design when it doesn't need to be broken down, and Patrick Mahomes is that kind of player, then being a freelancer, if you can work together, can be very, very effective. If you're working with a true pocket player, like I guarantee someone like Tom Brady or Drew Brees or Peyton Manning, they would probably get really pissed off if a receiver was a freelancer because everything is so tightly timed up. So I think much of that also depends on your quarterback.
It's a fantastic point because, yes, Brady would flip out. They would go crazy.
Yeah.
You be where I'm expecting you to be.
Right.
You know?
And you know what happens then is those quarterbacks don't throw the ball to the guy when that happens.
Because they can't trust them because they're not where they're supposed to be. All right, let's get to the NFC West, Greg. Very interesting division, always. I tend to go alphabetical order. So let's start with the Arizona Cardinals. They made a jump last year, Greg, from year 1 under Jonathan Gannon to year 2. I think the question now is whether or not the Arizona Cardinals make an even bigger jump in year 3. There are certainly people that think that they can.
Well, I want to start with their defense. I know that Kyler Murray is obviously, always a big talking point, but I find what they do on defense to be utterly fascinating. Some teams in the league have copied it to some degree, and I'm going to try to explain it very briefly without going into the weeds. But one thing they do, and it's really interesting and really good, is they essentially line up in kind of a 5 quarters look. In other words, they take their slot corner, and instead of him playing over the slot, he essentially plays at quarters depth with the 2 other safeties right next to him. So in a sense, they play with 3 players, the 2 safeties in the slot corner at quarters depth, about 10 yards off the ball, and Budda Baker is almost always in the middle of that trio, and he's the add-in run defender 95% of the time. But it really works well in the run game because offensive linemen, Ross, you are an O-lineman, they're not exactly sure who that add-in defender is going to be. Even if they know it's Budda, they don't know how he's going to add in, and it makes it a little difficult to block, particularly in the zone run game. And they've had a lot of success doing that. But they've clearly addressed their defense. Obviously, Jonathan Gannon being a defensive coach as the head coach, they've clearly addressed their defense. They took Walter Nolan in the first round. I believe it might have been pick 11. I thought he was the best defensive tackle prospect in this draft class. They took Will Johnson in the second round, the Michigan kid who was hurt, but was viewed as, high-level traits when healthy. So they've definitely addressed. They signed Josh Sweat, obviously, of the Super Bowl champion Eagles. So they've addressed their defense in a major, major way.
Well, and that doesn't even tell you some of the old heads they brought in, Calais Campbell, Dalvin Tomlinson.
Yep.
They made a decision. I mean, it's year 3, and they said, we need some winners. We need some veterans to show these young guys, there is nobody better to make sure Walter Nolan's doing the right things than Calais Campbell.
Without question.
I mean, he's like one of the most impressive guys I've ever met.
I agree. I've met him, and he's amazing.
All right. What about, Greg, the offensive side of the ball?
Yeah.
It's so weird. You can talk to 10 people and almost get 10 different opinions about Kyler Murray.
And I'm one of those people because I tell you what, I've watched him and I've made it a point to watch him over and over. And I'm going to be totally honest, Ross. I can't get a feel for what Kyler Murray is. He's obviously throws the ball well. We know that as an athlete and a mover that he can be utterly dynamic. I mean, there are times he looks like he's not far from Lamar Jackson in the way he moves and makes plays with his legs. But I don't, not being there every day, I don't know why there's an inconsistency. And I hate using that word. It's such an easy word to throw around. Oh, he needs to be more consistent. I'm not a believer in using that word as sort of a foundation for players, but I just can't understand why there's an up and down nature to his performance. Let's put it that way. And not being there every day, I think that's a hard thing to figure out. Some could say their offensive line isn't great. Any number of reasons you could throw out. But, I just think that to me, he's one of those quarterbacks that you're not sure what you're going to get week to week. And I think that is something that drives coaches crazy, because I think coaches would almost rather have a player with lesser talent that they know exactly what they're going to get. They can trust him to do certain things really well, and that's what they do. I think with Kyler Murray, the spectrum runs, it's a wide spectrum on a week-to-week basis.
Greg, I did a couple of games last year. There's no question. It's like a week-to-week thing.
Yeah.
And you really don't know. There are times where it's a half-to-half thing.
Yeah.
And I remember somewhere in the Patriots building when I played there, it said their most important thing they wanted from a player was consistency, because they felt like, hey, if you consistently are a bad pass rusher, but you're great against the run, that's fine. They won't put you out there when it's a pass rush. They'll just put you out there to defend the run. But as long as they know what you are, they're not going to put you in a bad spot. But if they can't get a handle on what you are, then they can't utilize you in a way that puts you in a good position.
I mean, I remember last year, I don't know if you did this game, it was early in the season. It might have been week 2 against the Rams when they beat the Rams, and he made, 2 or 3 of those Kyler Murray unbelievably spectacular, outside of structure plays. Of course, those are plays you can't count on every week, but he's so capable of making those, and they're wow plays. But, he's a very hard guy for me to evaluate on a week-to-week basis.
Speaking of the Rams, let's go to them next, Greg. Look, they have a good team. They brought in Devontae Adams. Certainly, Stafford's still there. They took the Eagles to the wire in the playoffs last year. What jumps out to you about the Rams?
Well, God, we could talk about the Rams forever, but I just want to start with Stafford, because you talk to people around the league, and I know you do games, and this is what you do. There may be no more highly respected quarterback in the league than Matthew Stafford. This guy, for teams that have to play against him, for offensive coaches that are quarterback guys, Matthew Stafford is considered truly an elite player, and I'm not sure fans see him that way, but that's the way he's viewed in the league. But anyway, I just want to get we've done a lot on Devontae Adams so we won't go there again. But I think we have to look at their defense. Over the last 6, 7, 8 games, that young defensive front, Ross, became maybe as good as any in the league. Obviously, they have Jared Verse, who's a really strong power edge player. We saw over the last part of the season, Braden Fisk really come on. Kobe Turner, a 3rd-round pick a couple of years ago, has been really good. This team stunts. They have multiple stunt concepts up front. They may do that with their 4-man D-line as well as any team in the league. And then they ended up playing a ton of dime with 6 defensive backs. I think maybe 25, 27% of the time down the last 7, 8 games. And a really key player for them became Jalen McCullough, who's their dime player. And again, when you play dime that higher percentage of time and that player plays 20, 25 snaps a game, those are really, really important snaps because they're in high leverage critical situations. So this is a really, really good defense with a front four that can be dominating.
It's funny. I said earlier in the show that I think Joe Douglas knows what a football player looks like. Les Snead. I mean, to get these D linemen, Turner and Young and Fisk after the first round that play that well. I mean, Verse is one thing. He's awesome. He's also a first-round pick. To get these guys in rounds 2 and 3 that get after your you-know-what, like those guys do, and they come at you waves. And listen, Greg, there's value in having veterans, and I get that. There's a lot of value in having young, hungry guys, too.
I mean, these guys...
You can feel it when they play.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that front four was, like I said, maybe the best in the league going down the stretch.
It's interesting, too, Greg, because I had A.Q. Shipley on the show recently, who coached for a year and studies it pretty hard, and he was just raving about McVay and McVay's offense and the things that he does and watching it. Just kind of like people rave about the 49ers. And, there's a lot of metrics out there, Greg, like explosive plays, explosive play differential, where the Niners fared a lot better last season than I think people realize. I mean, obviously they had a down year.
Right.
But I'm not sure it was as down offensively, especially considering the injuries they had, as people might think. I mean, with no Ayuk and Debo in and out, no McCaffrey, no Trent Williams, they still produced a lot of explosive plays.
Yeah, well, again, I know a lot of people, because they had a bad year and they've been in the Super Bowl and haven't won, a lot of people think, oh, Kyle Shanahan, he's not very good. Kyle Shanahan is absolutely one of the best in the league. And, Brock Purdy is another player that, everybody wants to discuss. We live in a time, Ross, with quarterbacks, because of the way they're brought up now from the time they start playing football. The era sort of and I'll explain this as quickly as I can, of the Bradys, the Brees, and Mannings, guys who are pre-snap operators. There might be 2 guys in the league like that. Joe Burrow's like that. Aaron Rodgers, because he's from the older era, he's like that. But most quarterbacks now are what we call post-snap operators. They're basically taking the snap and then figuring out where to throw the ball based on what they see. Just pointing out a blitz doesn't mean you're a pre-snap operator. Kids in high school can do that too. And Purdy is one of those guys. I mean, he sees the field intuitively. I mean, he is an elite processor, which allows him to throw with high level anticipation. So, you're dealing with a guy that is outstanding post-snap, and Kyle Shanahan is really good. Sort of his superpower is his understanding of defense. And that's why his play calling can be so good, because he understands defense maybe as well as any offensive coordinator type in the league.
So just to make sure I know, you're saying Purdy's not really the pre-snap guy, he's the post-snap.
No, he doesn't even call the protections. Their center does.
Got it. Okay. So he's not a pre-snap operator.
No, I mean, like I said, a lot of guys can point out a blitz. That doesn't mean you're a pre-snap player. I'm talking about where you control the game at the line of scrimmage before the ball is snapped.
What about, Greg, on the defensive side of the ball? They've made some additions there. Their first 2 picks, Mykel Williams, Alfred Collins. They traded for Bryce Huff, who Robert Saleh, the new again D coordinator, is familiar with. What do you see from them on that side of the ball?
Yeah, I mean, they drafted, 3 guys that I think are going to be, meaningful contributors. Now, again, I'm not saying they'll be great players as rookies, but I think they'll be contributors for sure. That's obviously Mykel Williams to play opposite Bosa. Alfred Collins is a freak of nature. 6'6", 332, arm length is about 35. They'd love for him to start at D tackle. And C.J. West from Indiana is he was a 4th-round pick, but he's just a really good player. He's one of those strong rotational inside D tackles. And, obviously we'll see what they do on the back end. They're going to start Renardo Green, who was a rookie a year ago and got really meaningful snaps toward the end of the season. I think I loved him coming out of Florida State as a press type corner. Robert Sala's back. I mean, he did a great job there. I know they are very high on D. Winters as the replacement for Dre Greenlaw. Winters obviously played a lot a year ago, and his tape is good. So, again, they're depending on young players, but, sometimes in this league, you got to do that, Ross. You know that. You just talked about young players with the Rams. At some point, you got to draft players and you got to play them. And, obviously you have to go by your scouts and your coaches and your evaluators and then, hope that they turn out to be what you think they're going to be.
Listen, the Eagles are going to play a lot of young players this year. They have to. When you're paying like 10 guys over $20 million a year, some of the young guys have to play.
Have to play.
It's like a math equation.
Yeah.
Let's talk Seahawks. For whatever reason, Greg, I don't feel like I have a great feel for the Seahawks this year. New offensive coordinator, with Kubiak, new quarterback. What are you thinking from them?
Well, I think we talked about this when they signed Darnold. The reason they signed Darnold is because Kubiak is sort of the old school, let's put the quarterback under center, let's run this zone run game, predominantly outside zone. And when you look at what Darnold did last year in Minnesota under Kevin O'Connell, he had the second most play action dropbacks under center in the league. Jared Goff was first, Darnold was second, and he was phenomenal at it. He was super efficient. So I'm sure they see him as a really strong fit in the offense of Kubiak. Now, the key thing for them is going to be their O-line. They drafted Gray Zabel in the first round. He's going to start at left guard. From what I've been told, they're really, really happy with him through the offseason process. Again, that's all we have up to this point. Until we play games, do we know for sure? Of course not. They really like Christian Haynes, who they drafted in the third round a year ago. They see major development from him. So if those two guards can play at a reasonably high level, then their O-line will be significantly improved. Now, Kenneth Walker has to stay healthy because the whole foundation of this style of offense is that you have a running game that means something, that you can line up and hand the ball to the back and you can stay on schedule.
And then on the defensive side of the ball, Greg?
I mean, it's Mike McDonald, and I love what they're doing on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, I love the fact that they got Emanwari in the second round. He was, to me, the best safety prospect in the draft. Because they're in Seattle, Ross, and they don't get a lot of, publicity, so to speak, in the rest of the country, I'm not sure a lot of people realize how good a player Julian Love is. He's one of the best safeties in the league right now. I think you talked about Calais Campbell in Arizona. I think bringing in a DeMarcus Lawrence, who may not be the same pass rusher that he was 3, 4, 5 years ago, but another one of those veterans, knows how to set the edge, knows how to do all the little things that are necessary to play really good defense. So I think this defense has a chance to be really, really good as the season progresses.
Check him out on social media at Greg Cosell. I am beyond fired up for AFC West next week. There will be a ton of news. Greg was recently at the NFL O-line Masterminds. I forgot to ask him about that, so we'll get a chance to ask him about that next week as well. It is awesome. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Ross. Appreciate it.
All right, let's dive into the news, but first... All right, we got the weekend coming up. Again, they come at you fast. I guess I count Thursday as the start of the weekend in my world, at least in the off season, which means it's Labatt Blue Light time. Buy beer, get gear at a minimum. If you haven't done this yet, rewards.labattusa.com. Just check out their gear. Like, I guarantee there's multiple items that you will be like, I must have those. And it's easy. All you have to do is drink Labatt Blue Light to get them. Rewards.labattusa.com.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross, you mentioned it briefly at the end of yesterday's show, but do you have any other thoughts on Trey Smith's new contract or the two big Jets deals that you talked about with Greg?
Well, a couple things. Greg and I kind of touched on it as it relates to the Jets' new regime. I think this is very smart by them. This makes a lot of sense to me to establish that, hey, if you're a good player here, you're going to get paid. I think that's positive vibes going into training camp, the first training camp with the new head coach, new GM, and you've got, your young marquee player on each side of the ball should be in good spirits. They're taken care of financially, should be, provide leadership. I like that move. And then the Trey Smith, I think he's the number one enforcer in the NFL. number one offensive lineman that you have to worry about because of the way in which they play the position. And I think the Chiefs recognized there's a lot of value in having that guy, and they did not want to lose that physical edge that Trey brings, and I adore.
Some other news includes the Chiefs. They released wide receiver Justin Ross. The Commanders late last night, they signed Von Miller. Chargers running back Najee Harris, he is starting training camp on the NFI list after that fireworks incident. And Ndamukong Suh, he was retiring after 13 seasons in the league.
Well, kudos to Ndamukong. That's a terrific, terrific career. I don't think Greg and I mentioned it earlier, by the way, with the Niners, but Jawan Jennings has said he wants a new contract or a trade. He's not going to get traded. The Niners are kind of all in this year, and with Ayuk coming off that injury, they'll have to figure something out there. I don't really know what Von Miller has left. You know, he might be at the stage where the name is a lot bigger than the production. I think the Najee Harris thing is very interesting because, you know, Dr. Chow, sportsinjurycentral.com, they said that this eye injury is not a nothing burger, and it definitely isn't. If he's getting treatment at Stanford and he's starting on the NFI list, that is certainly something to watch as it relates to Najee Harris. Have a terrific weekend, everybody. Make sure you're following me on social media at Ross Tucker NFL. I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. I think I reposted yesterday. Somebody got it for their wife for their anniversary, and they tagged me on it at Ross Tucker NFL. That is awesome. BackOfficeScheduler.com, HumanHeadNYC.com, Sporticulture, Pizza Boy Brewing.